To check out all our products, go to musicnomadcare.com.
So now onto our bridge setup. We've set our truss rod, and that will not be impacted by the adjustments we're going to make on the bridge. So we're good on the neck part. So we'll move on to our bridge. On an individually adjustable saddle bridge, the first thing we'll do is set our outer two strings to the action height that we want. To measure our outer string action, we'll use our string action gauge. And this, the MusicNomad gauge that we have developed is, I think, far superior to any gauge that's out there. One big advantage that this gauge has over others is just the ease of readability. It has a white etched markings on a black background, so it has a lot of contrast. It really pops. The more common silver gauges have a tendency, the contrast between the black markings and the silver gauge is not as great. And if you have shadows or you have a little parallax, depending on the angle that you're looking at, it just can be really hard to read. So I'm really happy to use this because I can actually see it. It also has markings for millimeters, 64ths, and thousandths of an inch, so you can measure your action height those three ways. A lot of people, people do them all different ways, so we have all three of the markings on there. There's a ruler on either end, one side millimeters, one side in inches, and then there's a chart on each side that shows the most common measurements, action measurements for acoustic guitar, electric guitar, and bass. And those are in thousandths of an inch and also in millimeters. So it's very easy to pick up the gauge and look and see, okay, I have an electric guitar, so I'm going to look here for my action in inches. So I look at the electric column, and I've got my action low E, high E, and the most common measurement for this is going to be a low medium action. And that's going to be 60 thousandths of an inch of action on the bass side and 50 thousandths on the treble side. Now, we didn't come up with those numbers just out of thin air. Having done literally thousands, probably tens of thousands of setups at this point through both of my shops, we just know that those action specs work really well for 90% of the players. I mean, I contend that if every guitar in the world was set up with those action specs, most players would be completely fine with it and everybody would be happy. So they work really well across a wide range of playing styles and a wide range of player technique. So we're going to use the low medium spec on this guitar. So we'll do 60 thousandths on the bass side and 50 thousandths on the treble. So I will use my pick capo to hold down my low E string at the first fret. And then I will put the guitar in the playing position. Having found the inches rule, I will go ahead and put my string action gauge behind the low E string at the 12th fret. So what I'm looking for is what line on the gauge meets the bottom of the string. An easy way to start this is you can take your 20 thousandths line and put that right on the 12th fret. And that should be well below the bottom of your string, unless your action is just incredibly low, but that should be very easy to read. Then you can move your gauge to the left and you will see the lines getting closer and closer to the string as the gauge moves across the 12th fret. So now on this guitar, I'm finding that my low E string is sitting right on top of the 70 line. So this guitar has an action of 70 thousandths of an inch on the bass side. So I'm going to want to lower that down to 60 thousandths of an inch. So in order to do that, I will get the Allen wrench that fits the saddle screws on these saddles. Now, an American Fender is going to have a 50 thousandths of an inch Allen wrench to fit these saddle screws. So I'll find my 50 thousandths Allen wrench here in my toolkit, and I can lower my saddle by loosening the screws. I'm going to turn them to the left, and those are going to back the screws out of the saddle, which is going to allow the saddle to lower towards the bridge. So I'm going to back out the one screw, then back out the other. I always want to be sure that whenever I'm finished adjusting the saddle bottom is parallel to the bridge plate. You don't want it tilted one way or the other. You want to have direct string pressure on both saddle screws. So now that I've done that, I will make sure tune back to pitch and remeasure. Okay, So that is exactly at the top of the 60 line. So I now know that I have 60 thousandths of an inch action on the bass side. So now I will move to the treble string and do exactly the same thing. Put my pick capo at the first fret, holding down the high E at the first fret. Then I will put my gauge behind the high E. And this is sitting at 70 thousandths on the treble side, just like it was on the bass side. So I'm going to go ahead and lower that down by loosening the saddle screws. Until I have 50. So that is sitting exactly on top of the 50 line. So I have 50 thousandths of an inch action on my treble side, which corresponds to the low medium setting for electric guitars, which is the most common. So now tune back to pitch. And I can set my inner 4 strings now using my radius gauge. Now I've measured this neck, and very common for a vintage Fender, it is a 7 1/4 radius. And the radius gauges that I helped design with MusicNomad, I think are really the best ones out right now. They have a black finish, which is very easy to read. The contrast between the black surface and the string is a lot better to my eye than the silver, which can kind of blend in with the strings. It also has on it, etched on it, it has the some instructions, just helpful reminders that your string radius is going to equal your fretboard radius. So this arc of your strings will equal the arc of your frets, and it shows where to place the gauge just about 1/4 of an inch in front of the saddles, and that and in order to measure your fretboard radius, the instruction is there that you would have your strings off and you would measure at the last fret. So they're just really easy to use, very easy to read, and have some helpful instructions if, like me, you have trouble remembering everything. So with my radius gauge, I like to pick the guitar up so I can look down the strings. And I will take my radius gauge and place it on the strings. Now this is rocking pretty severely in the center, so I know that my string arc is rounder than the radius that I want it to be. So I'm going to need to lower these inner 4 strings in order to make a perfect 7 1/4 radius. I find that it's easier to, if you find that your guitar is in the same condition with the inner 4 strings higher than the outer 2, I find that it's easier to just lower all 4 of the saddles down below the gauge and then bring them up one at a time to meet the gauge, rather than trying to bring them down one at a time to achieve that 7 1/4. So what I'm going to do is just I'm going to lower the inner 4 saddles down below where I think they're going to need to be, and then I'll just bring them up one at a time to make that 7 1/4 radius. So by doing this, what we've done is we've set our outer string action to be a nice, comfortable height. And now we are setting our inner 4 strings to be an even height above the fretboard to match the heights from the low E to the high E. And what that's going to do is give you a very even playability across the fretboard. So now that I've lowered those saddles down, they are all below, well, the A is right on the money, but the D, the G, and the B are all below the gauge. So whenever you place your gauge on your strings in front of your saddle, sometimes, even with the best gauges and good lighting, it can be hard to see these small gaps. I mean, most of us in our daily life are not looking for gaps of 1/1000th of an inch. So if you have a little trouble kind of zeroing in on this, be patient with yourself, because you'll definitely get it. An easy trick is resting the gauge lightly on the strings, and then you can pluck the strings and listen for what strings vibrate against the gauge and what strings do not. So by doing that, I can hear my E hits, my A hits, my D does not, my G does, my B does not, and my E does. So I'm going to need to raise my D and my B in order to touch the gauge. So I'm going to bring up my D string just a hair, my B string just a hair, and then looking down it, I can see that they are touching, but by ringing them against the gauge, I can also hear that they are all touching the gauge. So I now have my proper 7 1/4 inch radius.
For detailed videos on how to use each gauge during the setup process, please visit musicnomadcare.com for all our how-to videos.